Welcome back to the Discover podcast, where we view faith as a discovery journey with Jesus to help you become the person God created you to be. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Discover podcast. On this episode, we are going to be sitting down with Ben and Jill Ng. They're two individuals who go to our church and have a wonderful story, not only of adoption, but through the process of adoption, how they've seen God teach them about His love for them, and also how God has redeemed certain hardships in their life. So if you're in a place where you're wondering, am I loved? Am I worthy to be loved? And or what does it look like for God's redemption to take hold of my life in the here and now? I think this episode is going to be of great encouragement to you. Hey there, Meadowbrook Church. Welcome back to this episode of the Discover podcast today. Super excited. We have our first couple on the podcast, Ben and Jill Ng. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So go ahead. Even though I just said your name, go ahead and give a fuller introduction.
My name is Ben Ng, and we've been going to Meadowbrook Church for about 3 years now, I think it is. And a little background about me, did not grow up in a Christian household. Big event that happened to me when I was younger was when I was about 10, my dad had a brain tumor and had to have surgery to have it removed. At that time, my uncle kind of stepped in, and he was the person that was a big support for me and my sister, started taking us to church, did the youth group thing, was really only a Sunday type of faith. Went off to college, realized that I was not the smartest person in the world, and that I found my identity in that. Yeah. And God quickly humbled me with that and really kind of started taking my faith seriously. And then didn't go the profession that I thought I was going to be, of either a doctor or an engineer. Wound up becoming a therapist and going to Trinity in Deerfield, Illinois, which is where we met.
Right. 20 years ago. Can you believe that? 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. That just shows how old we're getting. That I could say 2 decades.
You guys, are getting very old. That's a good point.
But thankfully, by going to Trinity, was able to have my faith continue to grow, and was able to meet Jill, and here we are today.
Yeah. I'm Jill Ng, and I grew up in a Christian home, grew up going to church, and I feel like growing up, I just really knew God very early. I think I confused a lot of my Sunday school teachers because I would talk about the Holy Spirit speaking to me, but not really knowing that's what I was talking about. And so I think that is something that really was hard for me growing up, because I felt really near to God and like I could hear Him a lot, and that made a lot of people uncomfortable. Yeah. And so I think a lot of my faith journey has actually been navigating the world more than God, which is weird. I think I've had to figure out how to kind of come out of my cave of me and God alone in this little safe place, and kind of invite other people into that. And so I think throughout that journey of inviting people into my life and allowing them to enter in to my day-to-day and not just be somebody who like kind of flies by, became something really hard for me. And so I think now growing up, I just had this continual testing of relationships. Like middle school, I really looked for God through dating relationships, like very casual little dating relationships, and complicated attention through theater and other things like that. But God really humbled me when our youth pastor actually completed suicide after sexually assaulting some of my friends, which I found out after he died. And so that was a moment where God really made me refocus and say, okay, like we have people here hurting. And He helped me see people different. And instead of trying to fit in with them or be accepted by them or validated by them, He was challenging me more to love them through connection and seeing them. And so that kind of began my journey of understanding how to bring my relationship with God into like relationships. Yeah. And I think that was like a vital point where I was like, okay, I need to do this. And then when I went to school, actually at Trinity, I was in the undergrad program when Ben and you were in the graduate. And so I think that was kind of cool to see how God moved through that process, because I was not going to go to school at all. And God just placed it on my heart to go and teach which I thought was going to be elementary school. Went to the first, like an elementary school teacher, and went to the first like intro to teachers meeting and was like, no, not me at all.
Straight up,
And I was
no.
like, I just wish there was like teaching, but like just the Bible. And my mom looked at me, she's like, you mean ministry? And so I was like, yeah, but the church had been really complicated for me growing up. I just didn't understand how the Bible and the church just like were the same. It was hard for me. And so I think that process of going to school and then meeting Ben really helped me understand a little bit more about how to kind of piece all that together.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It is funny to think about those years, 20 years ago, being at Trinity together, because you go to school with people, you then move on from school. And like, I never thought like I'd end up here. I never thought that we'd intersect. I never thought that you guys would attend the church that it's just this wild, full circle thing.
Wild.
And the thing that I remember, I mean, I don't know how much you remember. I've told this story before in sermons as illustrations and stuff. Like the season, it would have been my first semester at school, the whole floor played a prank on me and like pretended to have this secret admirer infatuated with me. And it was like this little concoction of all these people like playing this joke. I don't know if you remember any of that. I remember it vividly because I was the butt. Sure. I was the butt of the joke. But it was one of those like funny moments to think back on that season, to think about you guys being there.
Yeah.
And now here we are 20 years later.
Super weird.
So I'm really grateful for you guys to be here today. And one of the things that we said we should talk about is your journey with your family, because you guys have a very unique story to the makeup of your family and what family life has been like. So why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about the makeup of your family? And this isn't just to talk about your family, but how God has been working in and through your lives through the raising of your kids.
Right. Something me and Ben talked about last night was just that really our lives have not been so much about like these big moments. Like other people looking in at our lives, they'll be like, you're adoptive parents and you're this and you lived in the city or whatever, all these big things that happened in our lives, which we can kind of walk through. But to us, I think it was just constantly choosing to follow God together. And I think it's been this unique journey that began at Trinity, just in the way our relationship, like we were just very intentional with each other, like from the jump.
Yeah. So we have 5 kids, ranging from the ages of 16 down to 12. So pretty much all teenagers. Yep. Our oldest son is Jacob. He currently is not living in our home due to some safety concerns. Then our next oldest is our daughter Tashari, who's 14 and a freshman in high school, which is very weird to say. Then our son Charlie, who is 13. And then we have twins, Bella and Henry, who are 12, but they turn 13 in May. So we just call Charlie, Bella, and Henry the triplets.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious if you see a picture
and
of
it's
our
very
kids.
unique because if you see our kids, like Jill said, you wouldn't believe like, oh, clearly those 3 are triplets. And then also our youngest, Henry, he actually currently is not in our home either due to some safety concerns and figuring that out. So all of our kids, for those that don't know much about foster care or adopting in general, but there's a significant amount of trauma that has led to why our kids have gone into foster care. The intention and goal of foster care is always reunification, to be with birth parents, and that's something that we really wanted. I would say that Jill was much better at communicating and executing that than I was, because there was a hard balance of figuring out how to grow and develop our family while not wanting to wish ill or bad on someone else for that to happen. Because the only reason why we were able to adopt our kids was because our kids' birth parents weren't able to take care of them well. So I remember, I always tell this story that Jill was always very good at engaging with the birth parents that we were able to speak with. And Jill would like have phone calls with them and invite them over. And I would actually have to step into a different room because I didn't know how to handle that amount of dystonia, I guess is the word that comes to mind, of me wanting to be loving to this person, but also recognizing that if I'm wanting to love them, that I might not be able to keep the child that's in my house.
Right.
So I'm a licensed therapist here in the state, and we always have said that, God absolutely hand selects and takes care of and knows how your family is going to be. And people have said to us that, God hand selected your kids for you. Yeah.
Did you guys started off as foster parents then? Was it that was the whole intention, to just be foster parents for a season or however long?
Yeah, early in our marriage, I actually always knew that I wanted to adopt. So that was part of us deciding that we were going to be together, was you need to be open to this idea.
Yep.
Not that for sure we were going to do it, but that you were open-minded to it. And he totally was. I mean, we actually ended up babysitting for a family that actually lives right down the street from here, who had 3 biological sons and then adopted a 4th. And I babysat for them in high school because they needed 18-year-olds. So I would babysit because the child was in foster care. I don't know if the rule's still like that, but you had to be a certain age and have background check and everything. So we, me and my sisters would babysit this little baby that they took in. And then I think 7 years later, they ended up adopting him. And so there was this really long, difficult journey for this family. And so Ben kind of jumped in at the tail end. So I was babysitting for them when we were first married, and then he would come alongside and come with me and help with the boys or just hang out, and then ended up babysitting himself when I couldn't. And I think we were in that courtroom and Ben turned to me and he goes, okay, I want to do this. And so knowing that we wanted to be in Milwaukee was a huge shift. I mean, I did not. I wanted to go anywhere else. But Ben had fallen in love with the Milwaukee Rescue Mission when he had come to live near me the summer between when we were dating and when we got married. And so,
because you're originally from Michigan,
correct?
Detroit area.
Yes, I mean, I know it's very weird for those of you that know me that I'm not wearing anything Michigan right now.
I'm sure he has Michigan socks or underwear on or something. Just because you can't see it.
We'll just let you
let's
keep
just trust him.
Yeah,
we'll trust him on that. Yeah. And so, yes, please. Okay, so so we were doing that whole journey of trying to figure out kind of how to do that if we're going to be adoptive parents. Ben did want to have biological kids too, and so we did try, but it just wasn't working. And so we went to doctors and found out we were okay, we were healthy, and just decided that we could kind of go down one route or another, and decided that kind of submitting that to the Lord and saying, okay, God, we'll move forward with foster care and adoption. But if you want us to have biological kids, that's cool too. And here we are, no biological kids, and glad that we don't also have biological kids.
Very true.
Because God brought us our 5, and while it's been a difficult road, like Ben said, there are kids, they've always been ours, and I forget that I don't match them. I forget that they're not biologically mine all the time, because they're such a part of me. They've always been so ingrained into our family and obviously belonged. And so it was just it's difficult to explain that to people who don't understand. But for us, it was just so natural.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how long ago did you, because if I got it right, there's 2 sibling sets, right, within your...
No.
It's actually Charlie and Tashari are not siblings.
So it's just
most people think they are.
They do resemble each other quite a bit, but we actually we met Tashari first. We actually had 2 kids that went home.
Okay.
Or one that never came actually, but we thought was, and then one that came and left pretty quickly. And Tashari came, when she was 6 months old, almost 7 months old, and then we actually requested that we get back on a list. Actually, my sister yelled at me when she was at the hospital having her baby. Said, when are you going to have another one of these? And I'm like, well, you're having a baby. She's like, go ask, tell them right now. And so we went out and called and just said, hey, we're open to another placement. And then we met Charlie, and I found out years later, being in his mom's apartment, seeing his birth certificate on the wall that I'd never looked at because we were foster parents, didn't have it. Finding out that we knew about his existence about 20 minutes after he was born.
Oh, wow.
And that just the despair, the heartbreak of that and the reality of that, wasn't lost on us. The fact that 20 minutes on earth and they were already trying to find a place for him that wasn't with his mom was just a weight that we really took seriously. And just something that we really wanted her, to be able to take care of some of her kids. this was a woman who was really awesome, and I ended up developing a really interesting relationship with her, where I did get to see God's heart. Like I never really knew that people didn't know they were worth anything. And his mom was incarcerated. And I was writing letters with her for months and months when I had the address and everything. And she would write back, and I would just tell her, like, I'm praying for you, and I just hope you know how important you are to God, and all these like truths and, you know, some scripture, but mostly just like telling her that she was valuable as a person. And she's like, nobody's ever told me that before. What do you mean? And my heart, I just remember my heart breaking and realizing, like Ben said, like this ministry wasn't just for the kids, but also these families of people that deserve to know that they're loved and that they have value. And so I think it really showed us, you know, God's compassion and heart for people, but also opened our eyes to the fact that not everybody had that privilege of knowing that they mattered from the jump.
And then after Charlie, we were talking about possibly growing our family more. We had actually been doing some respite for a family, and that family had said, hey, we actually have, you know, 2 foster daughters that we're actually not probably going to be able to adopt. Would you guys be open to it? And we had done like a weekend respite, I think it was. And we're like, yeah, like we'd be open to it. So Jill outreached to our placement specialist and said, hey, if this family comes up, know that we're open to it. And then about a week and a half later, I remember coming home from work, and Jill's like, hey, I think her name was Rachel. Rachel from placement called me. And I'm like, why did Rachel from placement call you? Because we hadn't even decided for sure that we were going to be growing our family. And she's like, do you want to hear about these kids? I was like, no, I don't want to hear about these kids. We're supposed to go on a date. And in that moment, we talked about it, and we were going to go to Dave & Buster's on a date. And
Double date with friends.
Yep. And for those of you that don't know, Jill isn't much of a crier, but she was just very emotional the whole time. And we get to Dave & Buster's, and we're like, okay, we need to pray.
I said, please take this desire away from me. If this is not what you want to do, because our rule was we both had to be 100% on board. Yeah. Because doing foster care and adoption was already a journey. And so if we were going to take in this sibling group of 3, I was like, we have to be more than 100% on board. Yeah. So I was like, can you please just pray and ask God to take this burden away from me? Because I was like, I just feel like they're ours, and I don't know how to explain it. But if it's not true, like, I want to let it go. Yeah.
Or give me what it was that she had.
I don't even think I asked for that. I just asked for you to.
Well, that's what I remember hearing. But what's unique is we're sitting in the Dave & Buster's parking lot and praying. And I've said that sometimes there are moments where God like does amazing things. And apparently, after I was done praying, I looked at Jill and said, we need to go get our kids. I never remember actually using those words.
And then he got out of the car and went to go call his boss.
And I called my boss and said, I'm not going to be in tomorrow. We're taking in a sibling group of 3. And within a span of about 6 hours, we went from a family of 4 to a family of 7 with a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old and 2 2-year-olds.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a night.
Yeah.
Yeah, our oldest was actually 6 at that time. So it's 6, 5, 4.
Right.
No, 6. Yeah, 6, 5, 4, 2, 2.
Yeah.
But it was only for a couple weeks, and they had a birthday.
Yeah.
But it was just like such a whirlwind.
So and that's all the kids. Those that group of kids.
5.
Those are all the 5. So
that's it, Brian. We don't.
That's it.
We don't need to account for it anymore.
Right. So to get it right though, Jacob, who's the oldest, is a sibling with Bella and Henry.
We called them affectionately the bookends for a while because they bookended our other 2. Yeah. But it was really awesome. We always kind of knew Tashari wasn't the oldest. Yeah. I don't know how to explain that, but it just felt right that she had an older brother. That's our kids.
Yeah. So I think people oftentimes romanticize adoption, right? Because you're saving, you're rescuing, you're helping. And in the years I've known you guys being here and just, getting glimpses of your story and hearing like little snippets here and there, it feels like, as somebody who's listening and observing, that it's heartache after heartache after heartache. And I'm just wondering how you balance that. Like, there's probably initial excitement of like, hey, this is great, but then you hear lots of stories of just people like, this is just really hard. Now, parenting in general is hard, but there's a uniqueness and I think a greater challenge that comes in a situation like you guys have.
Yeah, there's something actually that's been on my mind today that I actually didn't run by you, so hopefully this won't trigger you at all. But when we had Tashari and Charlie, They were both little. They were like 1 and 2.5. And we had a friend, a family, a couple that we had been close to. The husband actually suffered from severe PTSD. Thank you. I was like, I knew you'd say it out loud. Thank you. PTSD, like really bad. He was in I don't remember which country, but he had just had a lot of trauma from war and such, and actually ended up killing his wife, who was our close friend. So we saw them a lot, and then didn't see them for like 6 months, and this happened, and so I think we understood that foster care and adoption included this type of mental health. I mean, Ben is in the mental health field. I'm like a person who studies people and how to love them, and I've always been really interested in helping people feel loved and cared for. And so between the two of us, we really didn't know exactly what we were getting ourselves into, but we knew the cost. I mean, we had lost a friend. We were going, I had a really traumatic experience at work where I had been completely misunderstood and let go from a church that I grew up in, and just by basically trying to show people they were important. And so kind of all those things happening right before this, and amidst our first several years of being a family, I think opened our eyes to the fact that we don't get to decide what happens. We get to decide how we love.
Yeah.
And so I think for Ben and I don't even know how to explain it because it doesn't actually make sense. But we just kept asking God every day, like, what should we do today? Like, how do we move forward on this decision? How do we move forward? It wasn't like we were like, we're definitely going to adopt these kids no matter what happens. We weren't planning on adopting all the kids that we met. We were planning on adopting as it happened. Yeah. And so to get the sibling group that was already, their mom had already terminated rights. And so there was no other place. Like they were pulled from an adoptive home that was unsafe. And so they had already been through excruciating trauma. We knew that the road was going to be hard, but we didn't actually look at it as like, what are all the things that could happen? We just said, Lord, we know this is going to be really hard. But we also know these are our kids. Yeah. And I mean, just like you with your children, you don't once they come out, you don't decide if you love them, like you love them because they're yours. Right. And I feel like in the same way, God has given us our kids and we've navigated it. And while it's really sucked, to be honest, like it's been really hard to watch I can go through all the years of all the ways God has moved in us. I mean, it's incredible. But I think these boys that don't live with us right now, they both, in a way, explained to me that they know they're loved. And I think for us, even though they forget and even though their trust is very, very difficult and very complicated, I think our job was to help them know they were loved and let them experience a safe love. And our job wasn't to, just like any parent, it's not to create this person who's perfect. It's to just be there with someone as they struggle to understand God's love. And I think it's helped us understand. I think I've been studying Hosea a lot and thinking about how I usually associate with Hosea, and God asked him to marry Gomer, a prostitute, and like love her, to be a metaphor, for the way that God loved his people. And I've just seen a big shift in in myself as from seeing myself as Hosea to seeing myself as Gomer. And I think God just really wants me to know how loved I am. Yeah. And I think this journey didn't just help us know how to love others, but how to accept that he loved us too. And I think that's just been the hardest part about the whole journey, is that we want everyone that we love to receive God's love for them. And I think the doors that this whole journey has opened for us to be able to share the gospel, to be among people who are in pain, loving people who don't love them back the way that they're used to, being rejected. We've had one of our kids, I don't need to be specific, I guess, has just told us they don't want us in their lives anymore. Like they don't want to be our child. I'm like, okay, but can we still send you things? Can we still call? And so just giving the space and this like open door, like God did, like he's like, I'll be in the desert waiting for you, Gomer, like whenever you're ready, to his people saying, I'll be in the desert waiting. There's a door of hope there.
Yep.
God's like being our door of hope, has allowed me to kind of release having to be my kids' door of hope. God already is that for them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's helped us to actually strip away our responsibility for their faith, for their lives being good, and kind of disassociating, like, helpfully,
Right.
our worth as people in what our kids produce and how they present. And just knowing that our children have hurt people, like, really badly, like really, really badly. And so knowing that, and knowing that there's a lot of pain that they've caused, we had to figure out and understand, in the same way that I don't reflect God's heart when I'm being terrible.
Yeah.
That doesn't reflect my heart when they have these make these bad choices. But also helping them understand that doesn't define them. That God frees us all the same from our sin. And so I think just the complexity of that, and the necessity of being able, like, if I had to learn all those things through this process, like, it was worth it.
Yeah.
And if I can share that with other people, I mean, we've been doing these family dinners at our house, and I thought we started them in December. It was something we wanted to do years ago. But we were honestly afraid, because our home had been this really scary place for many years.
Yeah.
And so, our boys one of them had moved in 2021, and then the other one we thought would do better, and actually totally it got way scary. So after that all happened, it's like our house was like in disrepair, and just, it hadn't been a safe place. And so kind of redeeming that and saying, we're going to make this a safe place again. I mean, one of our kids who stayed home, I remember saying, I don't know how to go to bed without all their screaming. And just the pain of that, but also the awareness of, like, it was worth it, but it's okay that it was hard.
Yeah.
It was a hard season.
Yeah. Are you able to give just, like, a little bit more texture to, like, the challenge? Like, can you share any, and I want to be mindful of the,
Yeah, I try to be
sensitivity
careful
of it, but is there anything
Yeah.
you can share that just helps people understand, like, what it is you were navigating on probably a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because I'm very conscious of, like, my kids too, because
Right.
we've talked about how we want our kids to also be able to tell their story.
Totally.
And figure that out. But I mean, on a day-to-day basis, I realized how hyper vigilant of a dad I was to make sure that everyone was safe.
Yeah.
Everything that was done was to make sure that everyone was safe all the time.
Because, not that we have to get into details, you're
Yeah.
seeing, like, there's unsafe behavior
Like-
that I need to
Yeah.
protect.
Like, physically safe. Like,
Yeah.
it was
So,
important that
like,
we
knives had to be locked away.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking when we had 3 to 7-year-olds. Like, we needed to be safe.
Yeah.
Violence was real. Threats of hurting us.
Yeah.
Threats of hurting themselves.
There were stays at mental health inpatient facilities
Yeah.
here
I
in
mean,
the area.
There were times where I'd be driving and I would have to pull over or try to pull over because someone was throwing things at me as I was driving.
Yeah.
That was a regular occurrence. I mean, it was so incremental. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling pot,
Right.
So it's like, we loved the kids so much that, like, we didn't notice how bad it was getting. And I remember one day sitting with one of our kids' therapists, and he just looked at me and was crying when we got there. And I'm like, why are you crying? And he goes, I saw a van that I thought was yours on the side of the road on the way here. And I thought you guys were dead.
The therapist
Yeah.
said that to you. Yeah.
Because of a story that had happened the week before. He was just like, I thought you were dead. And I've never heard him talk,
Yeah.
the way he did that day to our child. But it was so important because we were willing, I don't mean to be dramatic, but really we didn't realize we were willing to die for this all the time. I mean, our lives were literally in danger on the regular. And to us, that wasn't even like a consideration. It was, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
It actually sounds neurotic in a way. But it was just, they were so important. Like, we just knew that we needed to do it.
Yeah. Do you have because I would imagine there's a lot of connection with other adoptive families, right? There's probably a network, and you guys have been part of groups and things. But But I'm wondering, and maybe that those are complicated things, like to be a part of for different reasons. But I'm wondering if you feel like in hearing other stories of other adoptive families, like do you find that yours is uniquely different in terms of some of the challenges versus like you do kind of hear these themes of struggle and challenge at this level of severity that are pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing but not surprising the way in which God has used us where we are now in life to relate, connect, and support other families that are, in essence, going through very similar situations to us, but like 3 years after we started going through it. So, to me, it's the idea that
out of going through
right. But it's the idea that like God was paving the way. We've had interactions and moments where Jill and I will say, why are we going through this right now? Like, this seems really weird. Or why is this taking so long? Or what's this process? And then after, God shows us and we're like, oh, so that's why we've been going through this challenge. And I think that it's a very unique opportunity for us to connect and make friends and be pseudo moms and dads to our other friends. Like we have friends. My kids always ask me, because growing up for me, everyone was auntie and uncle. So I'd actually have to ask my mom, like, okay, is this like my real aunt and uncle, or am I just calling them aunt and uncle?
Right.
And my kids call some of our friends aunt and uncle, and it's because they literally have come alongside us in moments of where they've been able to support us, but then also recognizing that we're there to support them, and that it's like a much bigger extended family through the process.
Yeah, there was a solid 5 years before COVID when we had where things were rough. It was really just more we were isolated in a lot of ways because of the kids' needs and just people not understanding. I'd talk about a rough morning, and another mom on the playground would be like, yeah, my kid threw a game last night and then sat in timeout for 20 minutes and yelled. I was like, in my head thinking that's a dream.
Yeah.
I mean, we were doing 4 hours of screaming over the fact that I gave them the wrong plate and they just wouldn't ask for me to switch it. Like this deep-seated trust of like, you don't care about me and you hate me. It's like hard to explain that to somebody else. But it wasn't like because we didn't appreciate people caring about us. It was more like finding people that really understood what we were going through. To a certain degree, I mean, all of our friends, most of our friends still have all their kids home. I mean, to have your kids displaced is rare, even in foster care, but it is more prevalent, obviously, in that setting. We have found that our journey, while very complicated and while community was really amazing, I think our best quality in it is that we just admitted it was hard the whole time. I think a lot of people in the foster care and adoptive world often talk about the good, or talk about what they learned, or talk about the achievements that their adopted kids had. And so we just kind of sit in the good and the bad. I mean, we get to watch our kids learn about God and learn about how to love people different ways because of what we've been through. One of our kids was, walking alongside kids cutting at school, whereas maybe that wouldn't be a discussion that they would have leaned into if we hadn't had so many open conversations about mental health and safety. And, so you think about the benefits of those things. But the heart is there, and something we're free to talk about too. And I think I was bringing up family dinner earlier because we started doing this family dinner with the intention of a friend. We wanted to kind of redeem our house in a way, and then our friend from our neighborhood community was like, "Hey, I want to learn about how to talk to my kids about God. Like, could we maybe see you more often and have dinner together?" And I was like, yeah, we were thinking about this family dinner thing a while ago. We never did anything. Brought up the idea to Ben. He's like, yeah, let's run it by the kids, see what they think. And they were like, yes, can we start tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's Christmas week. Let's wait a week. But what's come out of it has been all these crazy relationship connections that we did not expect. A friend who had an adoptive sibling who's really allowed us into their lives because of the trauma that caused. This friend who's kind of reached out to me and said, hey, thanks for sharing your story in this vulnerable way. My parents didn't talk about it and the way it affected us. Like, thank you for welcoming me into what a healthy version. I mean, not that every way I do is healthy, but part of my healthiness, the part of me that's healthy, showing that and allowing people into that. And then we've had another family that lived 2 doors down from us and didn't know how to love us through the season and just sat. And I've gotten to sit on their couch, and they've been on ours over the last several months, just allowing us to sit with them in the pain of their daughter needing residential treatment, and just welcoming us into that. And I told this friend, like, I would do it all over again if it meant I could sit with you. But not only did it show me, like, what an opportunity, right, to show someone that they're important, but there was this literal out-of-body experience I had with her, like, last month, where I was sitting with her and I just started crying. Again, not a crier usually, but just started, like, having this emotional response. And she's like, "You're crying for you." I said, "Yeah." And she goes, I don't think I've ever seen you do that before. I said, "Yeah, I just realized that the way I've been loving you is the way that God wanted to love me when I was going through this. And I didn't let him. So thanks for letting me show you where he is, because I didn't want anybody to show me for a while." And so, like, those deep, dark, valleys are redeemed sometimes in these moments of when people let you in. So, like, they think, "Oh, I don't want to bother you. You've already been through so much." But to me, it's like, no, you're inviting me into my healing by allowing me to relive these things in a safe way, and allowing me to have distance, but also remember, and remind you you're not crazy for loving your kids so much that you're willing to lose everything, but how little that shows the rest of your family, how important they are. And so, if something were to have happened to us, which could have easily happened, how horrible that would have been for our other kids left behind, and the child that hurt us. I mean, just to know that is what was at stake, and understanding the great cost and the severity of the situation, has allowed us to really trust God to use whatever we go through for his glory, which makes it not as frustrating to go through, I think, because we are having that conversation all the time. Like, okay, God wants us to go through this. We're going to trust that he has a plan. We've seen the court system do things they've never done before. We've seen, supporting us and encouraging us. I mean, we've not had one word from the court system, because in order to get your kids in residential treatment, you have to basically tell the state, like, you're neglectful, like, on paper. And they overturned that and changed the paperwork, because they're like, you're obviously not.
Right.
I mean, they looked at our list of 30 providers that we had gone through just for one of our boys. And the hours of not only, I mean, I am an expert at intake now at a professional, professionals offices, but it's really just because we're willing to do all that. We wanted them to stay home. But now we see, we can love them in a different way, from a different spot.
Yeah. So let's take the conversation in the different ways you've seen God, like, continue to grow you and minister to you. How have you seen God at work in shaping you guys through this journey? So just maybe a couple snapshots and stories of that.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing that Jill and I discussed was actually, instead of saying for ourselves, we're going to say it for each other.
Oh, neat.
So the way that I've seen God really growing her is the way that he's provided her opportunities to redeem what he has for her in her life, in her commitment and understanding of who God is, and being able to communicate that well. She's had the opportunity to speak at a couple different places, and has been kind of getting mentored by someone that she actually used to babysit this woman's kids, and now that family, those boys are actually old enough that we've been able to be friends with them and spend time with them. But now she's been able to do that, and in her writing and her effectiveness of her words when she writes, I believe that many times that, like, the lie that she might have in her head is that, like, her words don't have power or strength or authority.
I'll confirm, I definitely do. I definitely do have that lie. Yeah.
But when she reads something, when she says, like, "Hey, can you read something that I wrote?" and I read it, I'm like, "Yeah, that's great. Like, that's how you speak. That's how." But when other people will say to her, like, "Wow, that's great," it's different for her to hear it from them than it is from me.
Sure.
So I really feel like the way that God's been redeeming her is affirming those ways that she has been created to do exactly what it is that God has for her, and the way that she's challenged me and helped me figure out what it means to be a dad and be a husband and what my identity is.
Yeah.
That it's not in what I do or what I accomplish, but that I find my identity in Christ, and that there's nothing more or less I could do that can change His love for me.
Yeah.
Monty will appreciate the agape that needs to get thrown out,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the sonder that my story has.
Give definitions of those two terms for people who may not know what those
Oh
terms
man,
mean.
you're gonna put me on the spot now. Now, if I say this wrong, but agape is the unconditional sacrificial love that God has given to us, and sonder is recognizing that every person has their own unique story that continues on. And that
Crushed it.
and that people don't just come and go, and once they disappear from you, they disappear. It's that they have their own story and their own life that carries on. So
Well,
I believe the way that Monty explained it
Yeah.
is if you walk off a set, that the people on the set just continue to live and go on. And that's been a great opportunity that I've had to talk to people around us and friends and family and guys in my Bible study, and just it's been really great that in essence Jill kind of started that for me, and then there have been other affirmations for that. So
Yeah, I think just to put context to that, I think with our boys, their trust issues were deeply rooted in reality. Their reality was that people were not safe, and they had lots of adults that weren't safe. So they assumed that at some point we would go from being safe to not.
Right.
Which again was based on actual experiences, where
Right.
these other foster and adoptive homes, the biological home, other people have actually done this. And so they were waiting for us to finally start abusing them, basically.
Right.
And so they would say things like, well, when you finally hit me, would you finally get it over with? Would you finally leave me? Would you finally tell
Those are
me
things
you
they
don't
would
love
say.
me? Yeah, all the time.
That's
and
heartbreaking.
it was every day. I mean,
Yeah.
it was words. These words were like crushing us.
Yeah.
It's like God redeeming my words. But then also like with Ben, like it's been so cool to see over the last year and a half or so, he mentioned this Bible study. I mean, these guys have just like, they've reminded me of how awesome Ben is, like all over again. Like I always knew he was awesome. I've always really liked him. Most days, let's be real.
Yeah.
But that's true. No, like we just have always had this really good relationship. And I think it's because we've had to talk through so many things. I mean, we've had so many decisions and we've just needed to be a team in order. I mean, the rate of people, I know we did research at some point. Do you remember? It's like crazy. It's like the amount of people that adopt out of foster care, like that have like significant amount of kids. It's like 75% end in divorce or something crazy. I mean, it's like astronomical. I don't remember the exact, so don't quote me on that. But it's definitely a significant amount.
Right.
I mean, I remember just like, we need to work on our marriage.
Is that because just the challenge of it can just cause two people to go in opposite directions?
Well, yeah, and a lot of kids, we had this problem too, is triangulation. And so there's definite intent to put people against each other. So you're the liar, you're not. And so like they would kind of choose one person to be the target and one person to be like their ally. For us, we were one team, so they couldn't. But then they would utilize a therapist or a teacher or a sibling, to kind of make us think we were crazy. I mean, there were times where we actually did think we were crazy. But they would also say things about us not being good parents or not being safe. Like, you're really angry. You're going to hit me. You hate me. I don't know, all these horrible things. I try not to remember them. But what I've been able to see is not only these men have come around Ben, just to be there for him, but they've also just spoken truth to him about his character and asked him for help on parenting and how to love their wives. And to me, when we are in this season of feeling like, I mean, I don't know how else to put it, like in a way, like we've failed parenting in a way on, to the world standards of like failing is not having our kids with us. I mean, to me, if you ask me what's one of the worst things that could have happened, I mean, that's it. And we're living that right now. So the pain isn't over. We're still living it. But God had really welcomed Ben into this place of leadership and allowed him to lead these other men and having them ask for him not only spiritually to guide them, but also, in parenting. And then also like a huge cool thing is before the kids came, he would do the youth group at our old church.
Yeah.
And when the kids were young, they would do it, but really became really difficult when all the kids were home. When we had all 5 at home, just because we needed help. And so he stopped doing that eventually. But the way that he's walked into the youth group and just kind of redeemed that, not only that he could lead there, but also these young men love Ben so much that he not only was invited to the middle school retreat because he's a leader in the middle school, but he was a high school leader for a month or something. And all the high school boys yelled at me and said, you need to make sure Ben goes on to the high school retreat too, because he's so loved by them. And so to be rejected by our son and being told that we're not good parents and that he doesn't want to be associated with us, and us being okay respecting that, but then Ben to have boys the same age saying we even had phone calls this week, kids asking his advice on things, and boys craving him being there. I just have seen God's love for Ben through that, and it's been really beautiful to see. Things we didn't know needed to be redeemed. He's redeeming.
That's cool. So just to help people get a full picture of what you just said, that's 2 youth retreats in a matter of 3 weeks.
Correct.
Right. That's 2 full-on weekends. And he's representing.
This is the middle school. I couldn't wear the high school. I probably would have been dramatic if I could have taken this off and had the high school one on. But I was able to spend 3 days with the middle schoolers at Phantom Ranch about 3 weeks ago. And then last weekend I spent 4 days with the high schoolers out of Fort Wilderness.
MVP of youth ministry right there.
Negative. That is a big. It's been.
They love you though.
It's been great.
Been really
I've really loved it. It's been an opportunity for me to get out of my head and just really enjoy being silly, but also challenging, hopefully, and encouraging all the kids to recognize the importance of God in their life. And my current soapbox is the idea and the recognition that, God has created each and every one of these kids uniquely, and that they have an effect, their sphere of influence and who they affect and how they act, no one else can do the way that they do. And that they are so important and so loved and so cared for, that if there's ever any time that something goes against that they can recognize that that's a lie, and that we will tell that out of them. And it's just been cool to see the way that middle schoolers have stepped up, and the high school retreat was amazing, and seeing students be like little adults almost.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was great.
Yeah, so I love the way that you guys did that, of speaking that into each other.
Yeah, I think that's
really cool.
I think that's really how we've had to function.
Yeah.
I mean, if I tried to see what's going well, I can't always see it. Because of all the lies that are in my head. I think we've learned that a lot of our struggle is internal. After all of this. We're still in it during all of this. But I think because it's not something people can see. I mean, if most of the people here, for example, have never seen me with the other 2 boys. And so they don't see the whole. So I think that's sometimes really difficult, is even, sometimes them not being there makes things simpler. And so for some people, they think that might be a relief. But for me, it's my boys are still not there. And so I think explaining that and kind of living through that and trying to not ignore their existence. I mean, even our other kids sometimes are like, why do you tell everyone that you have 5 kids and explain that the boys don't live with us? Why do you have to tell everyone? I'm like, what else am I supposed to do? Not mention them?
Pretend they don't.
They're my boys. And, after they understood that, they were like, that makes sense. You want to show that they have value. And I'm like, of course. But to them, they didn't have that thought process. They don't have to mention it. Nobody knows they're missing. But I think allowing my kids to see that we're intentional about how we talk about them, we're thoughtful about how we share their stories as much as we can. I mean, we're very imperfect, and we don't always do it the best. But we try to protect them and show them they're important, even through the difficult situation.
I think the other thing that is really neat about what you guys said of each other, I don't know if you intentionally did this, but you talked about what God is redeeming for Jill and what God is redeeming for Ben. And I think that's a really important way to frame this thing that's happening, because I had this, this guy I pastored with in Atlanta. His name's Jeff Jansen, an amazing guy. I was a missionary for so many years. He would pray for people all the time who've gone through hard things, and he would often pray for them that God would redeem that season, that God would redeem that time, that God would redeem that hardship. And that always just stuck with me, because I think when we think of redemption, right, we've been kind of working through, just finished this series called Storytellers that came from Psalm 107, verse 2, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. So often we think of redemption as like this salvation thing, like I say yes to Jesus so I can get to heaven when I die. That is redemption. And we lose sight of the fact that redemption is something that God does in the here and now. Like he is working to redeem our hardship. He is working to redeem our past. He is working to redeem our failure and our missteps or whatever. And so I don't know, I just think that's a really beautiful way that you guys articulated that, to say that God's redeeming things in each other's lives.
I think it's based on the fact that we've talked about how the spiritual journey is understanding how loved we are, and that the soul is really us, all parts of us, and we all crave to be loved and to be valued. And so I think for Ben and I, understanding that every little piece of the way that God shows us that he loves us, me individually, is redeeming the fact that he loved me all along.
Yeah.
He knew I was very good from the start. And really all that sin really is saying, that's not true.
Right.
Like, I don't believe that you want what's best for me, God. And so saying, okay, this is another area of my life where I believe a lie, and I'm going to submit that to him. And I think if this whole journey brought up to light more ways that we could understand God's love, not only for us, but for others, like, what a blessing. I would do it again. I mean, I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but yeah, he doesn't have to answer that. I think it would be better not to. No, not because he wouldn't, but I think it's just something I wouldn't want to ever make anyone feel like they had to answer.
Right.
But I think for me, I've just had to really be prayerful about that, because when I walk with so many people, I mean, there's so many people who call me to talk about these things, just to remind them that I would.
Yeah.
I think being aware of that is really important, and just saying my soul craves this love.
Yep.
And that's what all these kids are really craving.
Yep.
And saying, yep, their soul craves something that exists.
Yeah.
And so I think, thanks for pointing that out, because I think that is what kind of keeps us married,
Yeah.
keeps us liking each other, keeps us on the same team, is saying we both see what God's doing here.
Yeah.
And we choose to focus on that instead of on the pain.
Yeah.
And I think to your point about, God redeeming, it just really points out the idea that God was redeeming things that I didn't even necessarily know that I needed redeeming.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
because he knows me so well.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, you need this. You don't even recognize that you need this until maybe even after the fact.
Yeah.
And you can look back and be like, wow, like God redeemed that in me without me even necessarily having the idea that I needed that redeemed. And now how much greater and how much more empowered and challenged and spurred on do I feel to continue to keep on doing the things that God has set before us.
Yeah, that's great. So as we wind this conversation down, I guess the one thing that is turning over in my mind is that if you can think about, you guys have articulated kind of in this season what you see God doing, but is there anything that you're, as you kind of look ahead, right? Because as we all know, parenting, like your kids grow up and they just time just clips by, and there will be a day when, your kids are out of your house, right? And so maybe that seems too far in the future, but is there anything you're thinking about, like with where you've been, kind of where you're headed, that you're just kind of anticipating or seeing or wondering about for the future?
Rare moment, guys. Ben and Jill don't have an immediate answer to it.
Stumped
I mean,
them.
I think what's funny is that, I mean, maybe not funny, haha. I think we were in survival for 10 years. I mean, we went from having 5 kids with trauma and all that stuff, losing our friend, losing job, then that, it's like all this trauma. It's actually, I think the hardest part of this last couple of years has been sitting in a healthy place. I think for us, it's been this weird, like, confusion of, I think people always talk about how God draws near in the hard time. And I think for us, God was obviously near with us during the hard time. I mean, we needed him to breathe. Like literally, I'd be like, Lord, what do I need? He's like, breathe. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. But I think this season of ministry not being painful, like just being a joy. We have moments that are difficult with the kids. All of our kids are exciting adventures. But knowing that God can be a part of the good, I think just helps us know that wherever we go, whatever's next, I think we don't want to prepare too much or think ahead.
Yeah,
because
sense.
I think we don't really know what God has for us. I think because we've had to live such a open-handed life of saying, okay, Lord, whatever you need us to be today will be. I think I don't really want to go from a place of that to anything else.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't think I want to think about what's next. I want to experience what's here and what's now, because I think that we'll definitely keep showing people they matter. I mean, I think we'll keep trying to point people to God and say, look at who he is. He's always been the same. And even in this rough season that you don't think you could go through, like we wouldn't have thought that either. Yeah. But that wasn't our concern. Our concern wasn't getting through it. Our concern was not missing it when we were in it and being in it. And so I think while we're very imperfect people and very aware of that, I think we just will do the next thing as it comes. I think that's why we didn't have anything to say. I don't think we think that way.
Sure.
I think we're just like, Lord, what is today?
Yep.
And if you reveal something cool, but we're kind of digging, being able to. I think our community has just really increased since. I mean, we just didn't have room for many, so we had a couple really close. Those two families that we really walked close with, but then at COVID they all kind of moved. Yeah. And then the boys moved, and so like we're still really close with them and love them, but we don't see them on the regular. But it's left a lot of room for other relationships. I mean, our buddy Nate, the Barlows, all the people in our neighborhood community. Right. We've had all these people that have just come alongside us. I mean, the Gilberts, I can't even explain all of them, but we've had so many people that have just seen us as people and not these people that were these parents that failed or don't see us that way. They see us as people who are obedient and did our best and walked with what God wanted us to do. And I think it doesn't allow us to sit in lies. It forces us to move through them and sit with them, but then get up. And I feel like what's crazy is we're not living in the survival mode. We're not living in the pain. We're visiting the pain. I feel like before we were sitting in the pain and visiting the hope. Yeah. And so I think now that we're surrounded by hope and there's all this hope and awareness of what God's done, I'm willing to do whatever he wants. Yeah. He's already asking me to do things I didn't think I was capable of, and I feel honored and unworthy, but also called. So trying to step into those things. But I think again, it's not this, because our lives are so full of difficulty. It's weird for it to be good and more natural things. So I think I'd like some more of that, I guess. Not because the pain wasn't good. I mean, it got us here. Yeah. But I think it's nice to be in a season of feeling safe again. Yep. I mean, we had a situation at home where the kids were just having a really rough day. And for the first time, my body, I remember God just saying to me, but look, you don't feel like you're going to die. Yeah. And I think that was a hard realization that for so many years, I didn't know if I was going to make it out of things. But I was still willing to go there. Yep. But that God is saying, you don't have to be in that space of danger to be obedient. And my willingness to is good. Yeah. But that doesn't mean we need to be there all the time. And so I think that's been a hard reality to sit in. I think the future, knowing that there will be seasons that are hard, but I just can't imagine a season being quite as hard. But every person deserves to feel so loved that people mourn you when they can't be with you. And so every time I mourn at them that I can't be with them, or that they don't love me back the same way, or that they just can't keep me safe, mourning all those things allows me to see how precious I am to the Lord in the same way. And I think in the future, just hoping that I can live in that reality more frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been great. Really appreciate you taking the time to share that one part of your story. And for those of you who have not had a chance to meet Ben and Jill, we encourage you to do so. You'll see them around church in all different places and spaces. And so, thanks again for just coming and opening up this aspect of your life, and we hope that it encourages many of you who are tuning in to listen. So until next time, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.